That was the music that says we're starting. Yeah, but you can carry on. You can carry on. Hello, welcome. My name's Giles. I'm an editor at Tortoise. For those of you who haven't been here before, but I think most of those in the room have. And welcome to tonight's ThinkIn. The question beyond tobacco is the end of cigarettes nigh is kind of familiar to me. I'm more used to hosting conversations on a different sort of pollution, I'll be honest. But it turns out that is carbon emissions. But it turns out that not only does smoke still kill, probably by most measures, many more than climate change, certainly than most other preventable causes of death combined.
Including COVID, I think, as well.
Including COVID, right. Is that proven?
Yeah. I mean, COVID's an epidemic which went like that.
Right.
Tobacco's an epidemic that's been going on for over 100 years, and over the last 50
Deborah,
has
by the way.
killed over 7 million. So, you know, that's 450 a day. That's a lot more over a long period of time than COVID has.
450, not 450...
A day in the UK.
Right.
Not
OK. And I know that Deborah's got a lot more where this comes from. So we'll get to that. But another thing that I wanted to say by way of introduction is that there are some self-imposed deadlines that remind me of climate change as well. 2030 in this country, 2030 in Finland, by which Finland intends to have eliminated not just smoking, but all nicotine delivery systems. And we've got Deborah and more experts on nicotine delivery systems in general, and an expert dialing in from Helsinki, and we'll come to you and I'll introduce you properly in just a second. But I hope we'll also be able to sort of break this question down into whether the end of cigarettes is desirable. A lot of people, I think, will agree on that. Whether it is doable in practical terms, and whether it is plausible, whether it will actually happen. And as part of that, whether vaping, e-cigarettes, all the alternatives are a help or a hindrance. And I've scribbled down here, what about free choice? What about the global south? What about countries that depend on an industry that, as your notes may have shown you, is worth nearly $1 trillion a year? A couple of very quick confessions, because at Tortoise we show our workings. We have been planning this conversation for a very, very long time, and we hoped we invited a participant from the tobacco industry, specifically BAT, British American Tobacco. Are they still called that? Or are they called Imperial Brands? All right. And they were keen in principle, but they took fright in the end. If, by the way, anybody from BAT is dialing in, please don't interpret my language as an invitation not to take part. We still really would love to hear from you. But it turns out that there's a kind of nexus of expert information about the industry, about its tactics as they see it at Bath University, and we were interested in getting people from there, and they didn't want to participate. But anyway, if by any chance we've got any tobacco industry insiders on the call, joining us online, please join in. And of course, that goes for everybody. Raise your digital hands. Get going in the chat where my colleague Kat is in charge. My other confession is, I feel a more personal one. I have not been immune to the sort of, and you'll bite my head off for this, the romance of smoking. Long time ago, I read this book, and I'm not gonna waste time by reading from it, but it's about a trip through Central Asia between the wars, and smoking is a big part of it. And then I went there 30 years ago, and the Russian emigres in Kyrgyzstan had this phrase, papyom pakurim payedim, at the end of every meal. Well, not breakfast, but lunch and dinner. It was, let us drink, and that would be a toast with plum brandy or something, smoke and go. And it was a kind of ritual that I got used to, and I deliberately took up smoking temporarily to be sociable. And so I'm not coming at this as someone I appreciate that the public health data is kind of compelling and black and white, but I accept that, for a lot of people alive today, trying to keep the habit, it's not a black and white issue. For Hemingway and others, it was an essential aid to inspiration. So, enough of that. Oh yes, I'm going to do a quick show of hands. Who in the room, if you don't mind confessing, considers themselves a smoker? And if you, by all means, raise your hand online so that Kat can get an idea. Tomini is raising a hand. We've got a half-raised hand over. Kat,
and that includes cannabis.
And that includes.
If you smoke cannabis with tobacco, then you were a smoker, basically.
Okay, so we've got one and two halves. Okay, really, really, really small number of smokers. What's it like online? How interesting.
Wow.
Okay, I wanted a slightly bigger smoker sample because I wanted to break that down into those who want to quit. Tommy, you're just going to have to say, do you want to quit?
Yes.
Okay.
But you haven't asked about vaping.
We're going to get there.
Oh, right, okay.
Who thinks that smoking should be sort of eradicated by law, outlawed, in other words? Interesting. 2, 3, not many. Bunch of libertarians, right? And who thinks that sort of widespread uptake of e-cigarettes or vaping generally could be a part of that, could coexist with the outlawing of cigarettes? So, okay, so not many of you. So, all right, we'll get to that. It's a pertinent question because, as I think we'll find out when we talk to Finland. All right, but first, Deborah, I'm going to introduce you properly. Deborah Arnott, CEO of ASH, Action on Smoking and Health. I'm going to take it as read that the first two sort of sub-questions, is it the answer to the first two, is it desirable and doable that the end of cigarettes be nigh? You're going to say yes.
Yes,
or not, yeah?
But not, I don't believe in banning it.
Right. But what about the plausible bit?
You can't regulate things effectively if you ban them.
Okay. Why?
Well, I mean, maybe it would be possible if so few people smoked that it was almost non-existent. But at the moment, 1 in 7 of the adult population smoke. If you banned it, it would go underground. And that's what happened in Bhutan. Bhutan banned smoking, and smoking rates amongst young people actually went up, not down. So I don't think banning is a good idea.
And what about my third question? Plausible. Do you think it's going to happen?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with the UK. How?
Well, a combination of strict regulation, very strict regulation, disincentivizing manufacturers from producing cigarettes and selling them in this country. At the moment, they make massive profits from cigarettes. They're a commodity product. The brand may be different, but the product is identical, whether it's a factory-made cigarette or roll your own. So they cost pennies to make, and they make massive profits. Imperial Brands, which is the biggest UK manufacturer in this country, bigger than BAT, which is a global company, made 71% net operating profits in 2019. That's £71 for every £100 in sales. Compare that to Associated British Foods in the same year, which makes tea and bread and other useful things, which made 6%. And I don't know what your operating profit is, but I doubt it's 71%.
Somewhere in the middle.
So controlling those profits, at the moment they say, British American Tobacco and Philip Morris in particular, which are globally the two biggest tobacco transnationals, say they want to see the end of smoking. But when they make such vast profits from smoking, there's no real incentive to them to do it. So they say one thing, do another. I was at the British American Tobacco AGM a few weeks ago, asking all sorts of questions about the environment and their behaviour and all the rest of it. And after I'd finished my questions, a guy stood up and said, well, I'm going to completely change the subject. I'm an ex-BAT employee, I'm retired now, and I'm a shareholder, and I'm a proud smoker. Your annual report says nothing about cigarettes, but that's where all your profits come from. It's talking about this better tomorrow, but that's not where you're making your profits. Why can't you be proud about where your profits come from? And he's absolutely right. But those profits are what keep the tobacco industry selling those products, both here and globally, and mean that in the developing world, where incomes are growing, they are on a marketing blitz to sell more and more. Because they're countries where smoking rates now are much lower than they are, than they were at their peak here, and even still lower than the sort of rates we have.
Well, we definitely want to come on to the low and middle income countries, because it seems pretty obvious that you could get to 5% and lower here, and the end of cigarettes would not be even close to nigh, because a lot of people... Anyway, but let's just stay with the UK for a moment. As I understand it, the regulation that you've talked about has brought down rates, or has helped to bring down rates steadily to about between 10 and 20%.
Yeah, about 14%. 1 in 7 of the adult population smoke.
And it feels a bit like the last mile problem in distribution. It's like getting from there down to 5% or less, which I gather counts as
That's
job
been
done,
the sort of, it's been the definition. But as you say, the distribution is unequal. So the poorest people smoke most now, and are most addicted and find it hardest to quit.
But how do you get from... I mean, how do you effectively more than halve the current prevalence of smoking in this developed country? Isn't that a really tough challenge? And do you need more than just regulation?
Yes, you need investment in the help that people need to quit. You need to do more to prevent young people starting. I mean, one thing that we recommend is increasing the age of sale to 21. At the moment it's 18. 2/3 of smokers start before the age of 18. But a significant number start after that. When the age of sale was increased from 16 to 18, smoking rates in 16 and 17-year-olds declined by 30%. And the same thing happened in the US when they increased the age of sale from 18 to 21. If you can stop people starting before they become adults, they're very unlikely to start. You are the exception that proves the rule by starting. How old were you when you started smoking?
I don't like to hear that. I just took it up like as sort of occasionally.
But you were in your 20s, I assume.
Yeah, right.
You were in your 20s, which is probably why you didn't become heavily addicted.
Right.
Because it's something you were taking up as an adult that you weren't really committed to in the same way.
And just say a bit more about why you don't advocate banning, because we're coming on to a really interesting case study in Finland where effectively that's what they're doing.
Because, as I say, that I think you can only really... It's the sort of behaviour that we're not going to have police on every street corner, enforcing it, going into people's houses, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, a good example is the seatbelt law. Seatbelts were made a requirement, a mandatory requirement, after the vast majority of people were already using them. And what it did was it increased the level significantly once it was brought in. But if it had been brought in too soon, it would just not have been possible, because actually it wouldn't have been self-enforced, and that sort of thing's got to be self-enforced. The same thing happened. We banned smoking in enclosed public places in 2007. 97% compliance from day one. France did it in the 1990s, but didn't bother to tell anyone, didn't bother to have a proper campaign explaining why this was important. And it didn't work. They had to do it again after we'd done it around 2009-10. Second time around, they did that. Public campaigning, talking to people, and also it had already happened in the UK, it had happened in New Zealand, it had happened in Ireland, Scotland, and it was successful second time round. And if you go into restaurants now in France, you won't see people smoking, but you did in the 1990s, and you did, even after 2007, although it was already illegal there. Anyway, sorry, I'm probably talking too much.
No, I think it's really interesting. In some cases to hear for the first time, in some cases to remind ourselves that just before we go to Finland, we haven't talked about the basic case for not smoking. Give us some of the numbers. I know that you've got tons in your head about the cost to an economy like this of the smoking, even though it's happening at a relatively small scale?
Well, there is a massive cost. I mean, there's a human cost too. And I was a smoker. I smoked until I started working for Ash in 2003, and I stopped then. And one of the things that stopped me, I mean, apart from the fact that it wasn't really appropriate for the chief executive of Ash to be smoking, was that I actually looked in great detail at the evidence. And, you know, everyone knows smoking is harmful, but just how harmful? Up to 2/3 of people die from smoking prematurely, losing on average over 10 years of life. And you don't die painlessly. You die from COPD, which is what used to be called emphysema, which means your lungs stop working. You breathe in and you can't breathe out properly, so you basically drown. You die from cardiovascular disease and stroke. You die from lung cancer, which is an extremely painful death and normally goes to the bones and other things as well. But it's 16 different types of cancer, and it tends to be the most lethal types of cancer. There's all sorts of other things it causes. You know, it causes blindness. It's a leading modifiable risk factor for what's called macular degeneration. If you're diabetic, it's really not a good idea, and is likely to lead to you having to have limbs removed because of the effect on your circulation. So, you know, there's all of this going on. And because of this, it also affects productivity. So in taxes last year, I think it was something like 10 billion were taken in taxes, which is all, by the way, paid by smokers, not by the industry, because they pass it all on. Whereas it cost the economy about 17 billion, about 2.4 billion to the NHS, 1.2 billion in social care costs because you get disabled younger and you need care sooner. And then the rest is in productivity because of premature death, because of sickness, absenteeism, disability, all of these things. So, yeah, the cost is enormous compared to what the industry says it's doing, which is, you know, paying for all these things. I mean, PMI commissioned a report in the Czech Republic.
Philip Morris?
Philip Morris, sorry, yes, Philip Morris, in about, it was in the early 2000s, I think. And it was a disgraceful report, which they produced for the Czech government saying, look, it's much to your benefit to encourage smoking because actually it saves you money. And it was completely bullshit economics. But on top of that, when you think of the human misery, how can they have the chutzpah to dare to say something like that to a government? I mean, it's outrageous. They wouldn't do it now, admittedly.
Tell us very briefly how you quit.
Well, I've told you this story. The day I was offered the job with Ash as chief executive, I had an interview with about 7 people and lots of questions. I had to do a presentation, blah, blah, blah. It was all quite stressful. And they rang me up and offered me the job. And I went to sleep that night. And I dreamt that I was at my first board meeting with all these people in front of me. And I got out a packet of cigarettes, took one out and lit it. And the horror in the room woke me up. And that's the last cigarette. It was a virtual cigarette I ever smoked.
It would be great if that were sort of transferable. Thank you. Let's go to Professor Arja Rampela. Forgive me if I've mangled the pronunciation of your first name, Professor. Hello.
Hello.
The technology is working. So you are Professor of Public Health at Tampere University.
That was right.
Yeah? And more particularly an expert in adolescent addiction and what Finland is trying to do to eradicate not just smoking, but all nicotine addiction by 2030. Can you give us a sort of overview about what the strategy consists of and whether you think it is going to achieve that target?
Okay, thank you. Well, first I have to say that we are not banning smoking. We are putting restrictions on smoking everywhere so that young people particularly get less and less exposed to smoking, so they do not see it and think that's what adults are doing. So, but our strategy has interesting things in that is that we started from health justification. So we didn't start from that's a moral issue or or it's a bad issue, but it was health, and there were doctors, medical people first who were the campaign leaders. Also, that we have all the time had population support and parliamentary support for that, and not so much in the beginning, but even the first tobacco legislation was unanimous decision at our parliament. But what we do is that okay, now we are having smoking bans and restrictions, and that concerns nearly all public places, buses, inside buses, trains, so you can't smoke and you cannot vape either. So that's what we do, that vaping and smoking, they are the same. And why nicotine came into our legislation was because it was more and more evidence of the harmful effects of nicotine and on human body, and then of course particularly on fetus. Then the pregnant women, pregnant mothers were smoking. So then we had these marketing bans and advertising bans for a long time, and it was so many times when the tobacco industry tried all kind of circumvent the legislation, but we were active, or the legislators were active, and they tried to every time find those loopholes in the legislation. Then we have had for some time already that if you wish to sell tobacco, you need a license. License is well, they say that it's expensive. I think it's not so expensive, and it's it also has to be, you also has to buy or pay this fee for each counter. If you have 10 counters in a mall, or you pay for this fee for every counter separately. And some the places where tobacco are sold, though, are much less now, so they went down after this legislation part came in. Then we have health warnings. Those are already a long time ago. We have had them, and display ban. And so you cannot see cigarettes, you cannot see these vaping things, cartridges or whatever. You cannot see them because they are hidden. Then about that, what we are discussing at the moment is about whether we should have also smoking bans in outside stands, terraces of the restaurants, auditoriums, those which are outside, because inside you have not been able to smoke. And schools, everything that has been also outside of school, that has been forbidden already for some time. It's interesting to compare other European countries when we had research about that. So they thought that, why don't you have these non-smoking signs in schools? That's a bad thing. But for us, it's such a self-evident. It's nobody would even imagine to need such a ban, such a non-smoking sign anymore. I think that's been already a long time ago. And now we are forwarding to plain packages in our new legislation.
Plain packages?
Sorry?
Plain packages?
Plain packages, yes.
Does that mean not with the kind of images that we have on them here? With
no, we already have plain packaging here.
We have rotting lungs and brand teeth.
When plain packaging doesn't mean you get rid of the rotting lungs, just of the branding, the colourful branding by the industry.
Okay. They could all look, for instance, grey, only grey. Health warnings stay there. That's what you mean, these rotting lungs, that's health warning. Yes. But then all would look, for instance, white or grey or whatever. So it's not at all fascinating for children. Right. That's what we believe. Then about what we also had is that there's a supervisory roles of state, regional and local authorities. What else there is, what I should say, sales ban, and then of course this sales ban for children under 18. That's right. And the interesting thing there is that each counter in the shops, if they sell cigarettes, there must be a sign. If you are under 30 and you want to buy cigarettes, you have to show your ID. under 30. Then you have to show your ID. And I've been following, it's quite interesting because it's asked for people who look under 30. And that's why this game was that it's very difficult. It was tested. It's very difficult to say who is under 18. Some 18 years olds or 16 year olds might look 25 years old, and some 25 year olds might look 16 years. That's why we had this regulation.
I'm interested in the way the whole country seems to be broadly behind this. Did you say that there was no opposition at all in Parliament to the initial goal of eradicating in 2010? Was that so? It was unanimous.
Yes, they were unanimous. All these decisions.
Does that mean there is no such thing as tobacco lobbying and politicians carrying water, as we say over here, for the tobacco industry in Finland? Doesn't exist?
Yes, it exists, particularly now, we could say for these vaping products, but it is in a way hidden. And then because our parliament, we have many parties. We are not like UK who has this 2 or maybe just 3, but we have many parties. And then the parties decide whether they wish to say yes or no to some legislation. And then in each party, there were a majority who says yes to the legislation.
Understood. Let me just ask briefly before we come to Sandy about e-cigarettes in particular and why it is that in Finland that is included under the umbrella of nicotine eradication as a goal. You explained that the health effects on fetuses, for example, were a factor in that. But over here, Public Health England, correct me if I'm wrong, regards vaping as potentially an aid to quitting smoking, and so takes a very different position. Was that at all controversial, including e-cigarettes in the strategy in Finland?
Well, we have 10% smokers at the moment, the latest figures I saw a few days ago. So if you think that it's important for this 10% who have this quitting agent, that not using those what are medical ones and under medical control, then you can do that. But what we are thinking is children, and our research shows that children, even those who have never tasted cigarettes, they might taste vaping products, those which have nicotine. They do not necessarily even know what they are. They think that they are healthier. They have no health effects. That's common what when we ask them. So our idea is to protect particularly children, and that's why the nicotine health effects have not been so well known. So I think that last 5-10 years we have just really understood what effects they are, because earlier we talked only about tar.
Right.
Yes. Was that enough answer?
Yes. For now, thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to you, but I want to move smoothly to Sandy Chadha, the CEO of Supreme PLC, the first UK vaping company to go public. You're doing pretty well. We were saying just before we started that actually business boomed and then leveled off a bit in the last couple of years. But
a couple of months more than that. Yeah.
12 months. Okay. Do you think that vaping is the future? Do you mind me referring to it as the future of nicotine delivery? Is that what it is?
My view, it's the most effective nicotine delivery. So in terms of people that want to stop smoking, it's proven to be probably one of the most effective methods to stop, more than the patches and gums.
Right.
So it's a different delivery method to wearing a patch on your wrist or on your arm, or putting a gum in your mouth. It's just different. And I think the reason is that there is half of the addiction to smoking is the nicotine. The other half is the hands to mouth movement. So you have a little bit of a combo of the two, and I think vaping sort of satisfies both those areas.
And what is your position on the negative health effects that Arja was just talking about of vaping, especially for children?
I mean, I'd say the same with alcohol or with anything that's addicted. So if a child is 18 or under 18 is going to start smoking, drinking, doing the things that they would want to explore, I'd rather they explore vaping rather than smoking, if that was the case. And they're going to explore alcohol. So if you look at the statistics in alcohol and vaping, which is more harmful, I think alcohol is probably more harmful.
So just on a sort of on a point of habit, and I haven't vaped, but I've been reading this afternoon about vapers who became so used to almost continuous intake of nicotine that they thought, crikey, I'm just too dependent on it. It's like a dummy. I've got to have it in my mouth, so I'm going to go and smoke cigarettes, 2 or 3 a day instead.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think you can be addicted to it and you can be dependent on it, but I am on coffee, and I was saying that to Deborah today. I have 3 or 4 coffees a day, and I tried to give up for 2 days, and I had bad headaches. You actually said you're going to have headaches. I had severe headaches. So, as a statistic, nicotine and coffee, which is more.
Can I come in on this point?
Yeah.
People worry that because they're doing it more than they are with cigarettes, that they're more addicted. They're not more addicted. What it shows is they're getting less nicotine because. Cigarettes are the crack cocaine of nicotine delivery. The smoke, inhaled into the lung, goes straight up to the brain very quickly, much more quickly than from vaping. So vapors are much more likely to graze, which is to sort of puff on it fairly regularly. With a cigarette, you start it and you finish it, and you inhale. And if you cut down, because you're a nicotine seeker, you'll just inhale more smoke and more tar. And the smoke is what really kills you. It's not the nicotine.
Yes, the tar that clogs up all the arteries.
And has all the carcinogenic substances.
3,000 carcinogenics.
Yeah, and the stickiness. I mean, I worked in a pub when I was a student in the days when people could smoke, and I was paid to clean the walls so it could be repainted. I thought the walls were a brown colour. They were really sticky. It was disgusting. I had to use, I can't remember what the stuff was called, to get it all off, and underneath it was white. And that's what people are inhaling into their lungs. You don't inhale that from vaping.
Yeah, actually, on the BBC website, there's a cotton wool experiment. Have you seen it?
Yeah, UCL.
Cigarette on one side, vaping on the side. And after, I think, 2 days, they take the cotton wool out, and the one that's got the smoking cigarettes is just full of black tar. And the other one's got like a lime on it. It's like a white lime, but it's not too bad. And that's the vaping.
Okay, well, let me come back to Arja on this.
Is alcohol banned in Finland? Just curious.
No, it's heavily restricted.
It's restricted in Finland. Okay.
But what is the latest research that Finnish policies are based on as regards the health effects of vaping for adults as distinct from children?
Well, we cannot talk about vaping and forget children.
No,
there's no reason for that. The evidence is growing about the health effects. Of course, when we cannot know within 10 years or 5 years, a few years use only what will come, as we didn't know about the smoking in old days. So if the vaping companies would sell it only for quitting, that would be in pharmacies or somewhere else. So when it is available for everybody can buy it. I don't know if that was the question, really what you wanted me to say, but we have all the time in this tobacco policy, we have had medical experts who have done a lot of research of these things, and all these decisions about the effects of nicotine are based on research.
Okay, on this, in just a second, but if we can come to Philip Pearson, who is you've got your hands on some research about vaping and lung damage. Philip, are you there? Do you mind if we turn the camera on you?
Hello.
What have you found out?
Good evening. Well, I suppose I ought to declare my interests. I'm Philip Pearson. I'm a respiratory physician. I am my hospital's lung cancer lead and tobacco control lead. So I have been doing a little bit of reading around this for a number of years. And what to say? Yes, smoking is bad for you. Absolutely no question. We've known that for 60 years. It does all sorts of nasty things to lungs, brain, kidneys, legs, etc., as Deborah was saying. The concern I have, particularly around vaping, is we don't know that it's safe. And increasingly, we do know that it's harmful. There have been and many case reports particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, published in the European Respiratory Journal and in another journal called Chest, demonstrating the kind of lung disease that is due to vaping. And we know it's due to vaping because the details of the case report are specific, that the person is vaping and not using other nicotine delivery products. So from my point of view, I am not convinced it's safe. Public Health England, together with the Royal College of Physicians and the British Thoracic Society, are very much outliers in the medical community. The quick list: European Respiratory Society, American Thoracic Society, American College of Chest Physicians, Latin American Thoracic Society, Pan-African Thoracic Society, and Pacific Respiratory Society have all said that vaping is unsafe, and in particular the direct marketing of electronic cigarettes to children, particularly using pretty colours and flavours, it mirrors the patterns that we saw with that the tobacco industry used 60 years ago. It is really wrong, it is really unsafe, and it is very likely to be a gateway to renormalising smoking again.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Because I'm a member of the Royal College of Physicians, which is Philip's
Yeah,
professional body, tobacco advisory group, and I've also looked at a lot of the research. America had a very specific problem, and it did lead to people dying from vaping, but they weren't vaping nicotine. They were vaping cannabis oil, which had been cut with vitamin E acetate by dealers who were selling illegal products, because vitamin E acetate oil is very similar to cannabis oil. So it's a way of, like you cut, heroin with God knows what. And it led to an epidemic of severe lung injury over a period of about 6 or 9 months, which led to people being hospitalized and some people dying. That has now stopped because it was identified. We never had anything like that. And the case studies that Philip's talking about, it's not safe, Philip. We don't say, the RCP doesn't say, Public Health England, ASH doesn't say it's safe. But relative to smoking, it is enormously safer. It is an effective quitting aid. And that's why we think it's important. Right. Because actually, over the next 50 years, if we stop anyone from starting smoking, we will only save lives in about 20, 30 years' time, because it takes a long time. The real benefit is from helping existing smokers quit, because they have baked in the harm. And for example, when you're diagnosed with lung cancer, 30% of people diagnosed with lung cancer, even though they're already very sick, are still smoking. If they quit smoking at that point in time, they will double their life expectancy. And yet, often, they are not even encouraged to, because people think it will be too difficult. A pilot study done in Scotland using e-cigarettes with people who had lung cancer showed good success, because these are people, if you're still smoking when you've got lung cancer, God knows how addicted you are. You are not going to be able to quit easily without having an alternative. That's what we're working for, is to ensure that that's the case. And I agree with Philip, the marketing needs to be tackled. There are loopholes in the law. In this country, you can't sell e-cigarettes to under 18s, but you can give them out for free. Okay. And the packaging and labelling is not controlled, so branding can be colourful, can use sweet names, can have cartoon characters on it, all things that are completely verboten for tobacco. Sorry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, we've got a couple of hands up in the room, and I want to come to them and back to you, Sandy. Sure. But first, back to Philip. I just want to know what you make of the argument that e-cigarettes are a good aid to quitting for adults who are smoking and urgently need to quit.
That is very much the argument that is used by PHE and the Royal College. With respect, I disagree with my own Royal College. I might agree if we did not have other nicotine replacement products that we know are A, clean, B, safe, C, work. And we do. We have patches, we have lozenges, we have gum, we have mouth spray, we have combination, and they work. The nature of nicotine addiction is a relapsing remitting illness, so you may not be able to quit on the first go, and congratulations to the people in the room who have. Well done. I've had people where I have had to talk through things with them. It's taken a little while, but on the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th attempt, with combination nicotine replacement therapy and some encouragement from me, they've stopped, and they've stayed stopped.
Vaping is twice as successful as combination therapy. There's a very well founded randomized controlled trial funded by NIHR showing it's twice as successful. Now, as you say, it's a relapsing remitting illness. It's a terrible thing. And the success rates are low. I mean, we're still talking about only 18% compared to 9% successfully quitting. And it takes on average 30 times for people to quit and many years. So, you know, we need to use all the tools at our disposal, and that includes vaping, not just licensed medicines.
Okay, let's come to, thank you. Let's come to my colleague Liz, and then my colleague Phoebe, and then we'll come back to Sandy.
I hope this isn't a naive and obnoxious thing to say, because there's lots of very serious points being made. I'm really interested in the marketing bit of it, in the choice to do it in the first place, to become a smoker in the first place, or to vape in the first place. I was very struck by what Deborah said at the beginning about the report that, was it Philip Morris produced to say, oh, which country was it? Did you say? Czech Republic. Yeah. It'll save you money in the long run or something. Because on the one hand, there's a commercial organisation producing a product. Their marketing, it comes from finding a market for that product, and then obviously what we're very used to in this country is principally a tax regime that is designed to sort of suppress the desire for that product, and then all the other things about take the logo off and put it behind the counter and what have you. So I suppose I'm reflecting on two things. Firstly, the what seems to me naively a sort of very cynical move by whether it's British American Tobacco, Philip Morris, or others, to actively source new markets in outside of the West, and how that is being positioned, and what the governments of those countries, what's in it for them to allow that to happen. And you said they wouldn't do it now, but my question is, maybe they are. I don't know. It's not like it's not a known thing now that this is a disaster for those for people and on tobacco front. And then the other thing, which is a slightly more frivolous point, is on vaping in this country. I see the shops where you go in to buy your vape, and they're not in the prestigious retail locations. It's a sort of fairly grotty experience. So my question is whether we know anything about, prestige, I don't know, coolness. Is vaping a thing that anyone thinks is a good look? Because I kind of a bit judgy. I don't know. I'm interested to know. In the 80s, you had the Marlboro Man and Silk Cut, and it was sort of, generally speaking, socially, it was quite a cool thing. There was no way 20 years ago, even if you asked who smokes in a room full of people who work in media, everybody would put their hand up, like literally everybody. But you don't find it anymore. I'm interested to properly understand this sort of cool aspect of vaping relative to tobacco over time. I just think it's interesting.
Yeah. Well,
As the what I believe will be a very potent lever to make people not do it. If you know.
understand the question. So the question is, so what's the question in terms of, in one line, is it why is it marketed, or what's your
What do we know about who thinks vaping is cool?
Okay, so my opinion, I don't think vaping's cool, and I think that there is, just to be clear, there is no advertising on cigarettes in this country whatsoever. Anyway, any shape or form, zero, no sponsorship, no nothing. And with vaping, there's very restricted marketing. There's only billboard or buses. That's it. So you can't do radio, you can't do TV, you can't do Google, you can't do AdWords, you can't do any social media. Instagram have banned it, Google have banned it. So there is very little marketing on both. There's a little bit more on vaping. My opinion is, I don't think either of them today, my kids are growing up, I don't think either of them think that either of them are cool. I really don't. I just think that the people that smoke in their 30s or 40s or 50s that want to give up, it's the best way to give up smoking. And that's my only opinion. And you talk about the person on that was talking about nicotine or the smoke vaping being bad for you. So what's bad for you? Which part's bad for you? Just tell me, how is vaping worse than a nicotine pouch? Just need to answer that question. Because I know I make the product, I know what's in it, and it's just a carrier for the flavor and for the vape. There's nothing else in it. It's clean. So when they say vaping's bad, it's been around since 2013, vaping. So 2013 to now we're going into what, 20 odd years? We should know now if there's a problem after 20 years.
I'm not the person to ask.
Yeah,
we might come.
How is it worse than nicotine pouches? Just curious, how is it worse than a nicotine pouch?
I think the point. But I want to ask you another question before we come back to Philip, because the question we asked ourselves at the top is the end of cigarettes nigh? Depends to a large extent, I suggest, on what the big cigarette makers do. Philip Morris, BAT, Imperial brands. Especially in the low and middle income countries where they're selling like they are.
We're talking globally now, aren't we?
I'm talking globally, because the end of cigarettes is not nigh.
Nope.
If they are going to go on selling large numbers of cigarettes.
So India, for example, vaping is banned. And Indian Tobacco is probably one of the biggest companies in India. So the question is, why? Yeah, why? Question is why? Do you know the answer? So I don't know the answer. I can guess. Is it population reduction? Is it taxation? Or is it the power of a tobacco lobby? Well, China Tobacco, Indian Tobacco, owned by the government.
Yeah, but that's the point, that it's that the Indian tobacco monopoly effectively is
a government.
It's very powerful. Vaping was new, so not many people were doing it, so it was easy to ban. They've also tried to ban in many states.
In Hong Kong, it's banned.
Smokeless.
Singapore. I mean, China, for example, Chinese tobacco. China Tobacco is owned by China. They have now had massive restrictions on vaping recently. They've stopped flavors. They've stopped. So it's just really interesting why governments are banning something they know and everybody knows is harmful, more harmful than vaping. So it doesn't make any sense, right?
Well, no, but it does help us answer our question. I'm increasingly thinking the answer is no.
I don't think vaping is going to be the solution in most low and middle income countries, because it's always going to be much more expensive and difficult than smoking. But what is the answer is the global treaty on tobacco.
Right.
And that's the key, because actually the really big things you can do in low and middle income countries is ban advertising, ban all advertising, is raise the taxes and control the illicit trade, which is largely fueled by the industry in their own interests. Those are the things that will really make a difference in poorer countries. Not vaping, is in my opinion.
Phoebe, I promised we'd come to you, and then I still want to come back to you. So
I've got one point to Liz's point, which is that I don't think that vaping is cool. I think it is that smoking is uncool. if you're going to go into any club smoking area in a club in London or in another city, it's not necessarily, you will still find smokers, but I think it's the other way around, that smoking's become something that's not seen as particularly attractive, and it's seen as a thing that, on dating apps, etc. So it's a small point.
It's seen as uncool.
I think it isn't, because it looks like you're not thinking, really the environmental arguments, etc., those kind of awareness of the wider context, and in terms of also, the impact on the global south and the impacts further down the chain. My second point is, a while ago, I had Philip Morris kind of put out this big announcement on moving towards heatless tobacco, which, and that's the bit I always get a little bit more confused on, is the difference between heatless tobacco and different vaping products. And I know you say your product is clean. I know for a fact that my brother has picked up a vaping fluid that's made him have an allergic reaction because it had other stuff in it. It seems unregulated. It had a monster on the front. No idea what was in that product. So great that you are, but that's a wider point. But the thing that really hit me was, to be a quitting product, you first have to have someone smoking. So surely in Philip Morris' interest and those companies' interests, they still would like the global south to start smoking, so then they can move on to their vaping products.
Very good point.
Like,
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Isn't that, because it doesn't make any sense to me speaking to people at Philip Morris. I was like, but your end goal is still to have more customers. So at some point you're going to want them to start to then quit. So is that true, or is that me just kind of?
Either start or, their heated tobacco product is designed to be like a cigarette, to replicate the smoking experience, not just for smokers, but also for Philip Morris. So you buy heat sticks in a pack of 20.
Yeah.
They've designed a product that you have to use them in that's, they spent a lot of money developing to make it difficult to counterfeit.
Big in Japan, right? That was my understanding.
Yeah,
smoking
and
was
they have
part
been
of
very
business culture.
successful in Japan.
Yeah, but that was the Olympics, right?
Vaping is, but heated tobacco products are very successful there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And if you look at they had to apply to the Food and Drug Administration in the US for a license for their heated tobacco product. And it says in black and white in the application that they're as addictive as smoking.
So what are we to make of statements by companies like PMI, Philip Morris, that they intend to become a non-tobacco company in the fullness of time?
So as a business person, as a businessman, I don't know how they're going to make any money if they don't. Because they certainly don't make money on vaping. Because
So you're saying you don't know how they're going to make any money if they do stop selling cigarettes?
correct. Yeah, if they stop selling cigarettes, I don't know how they're going to make money. It's a bit like Kodak.
Well, this is what I was going to ask.
I used to sell Kodak. It was half my business in 2003. So I've been there. I know what it's like.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
You used to sell Kodak
I
film.
was half my business in 99 to 2003, and then it disappeared within 3 years.
And look at what you did instead.
You got to reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then you die. Simple as that, right?
So do you see
And yeah, sorry.
the big tobacco companies becoming Kodaks or becoming Orsteds? That's
So-
my go-to example.
The bits I know about big tobacco, and the only bits I know is that they are very slow in anything they do. They're very bureaucratic in what they do. They have got a lot of red tape. They've got a lot of things to do to change anything. My view is that if tobacco and cigarette smoking is going to decline worldwide, because they're still doing really well in other parts of the world, if it's going to decline worldwide, the vaping is certainly not going to take up the slack. It's like digital coming to Kodak. So the digital era it all came to a camera, it came to a phone. What I'm saying to you is that I think that over time, over the next 10 years, I think tobacco companies will start going bankrupt, potentially.
Very
Next
interesting.
10 years. And 2030, there's a smoke-free target in this country, right?
Yeah.
So there's a cigarette-free target. So if they're not selling cigarettes, just so you know, the vaping probably represents less than 1% of their overall profits at the moment.
Right. The flag has gone up, which means we've technically run out of time. And what are you going to enforce this rigidly?
No.
I did want to go back to Arja very, very briefly. If you're still with us, Arja, 2030, do you believe that Finland will have reached the point where smoking prevalence is below 5%? And if so, what do you think is the single most effective piece of policy that Finland has tried that the rest of the world could use?
Well, I believe that we are very near to that in 2030. And there is no single piece of policy. our policy is comprehensive, and we have to continue with that. And also, what we have taken less into concerned or less concerned has been stopping smoking, so that we need those services to be increased, but not with e-cigarettes, but with medical help, as Philip said.
Thank you. Mark?
So Liz and I had a conversation about this ThinkIn a while ago, and we were talking about why smoking appears cool in different parts of the world. And I think that and this is an observation more than a question, there are so many indelible, striking images in pop culture from 60, 70 years ago where smoking is cool. It looks really cool. Marlon Brando looks cool. James Dean looks cool. Marlene Dietrich looks incredible smoking a cigarette. And you know, those images live on for a long time. And you know, you don't have to go quite so far back to still see sexy smoking images. You know, Blade Runner is one that leaps to mind. I think that's even on the poster. She's smoking a cigarette, you know. So it's all, I think that there's another part of this conversation, which is you can introduce all the legislation and all the technology solutions in the world, but I think you're going to have to wait a long time before someone doesn't look at a picture of James Dean with a tab and think, he looks pretty cool with the Marlboro packet rolled up in his sleeve and all the rest of it. I mean, you can tell I'm totally sold on it.
And contrary to what you were saying, I mean, but the New York Times ran a big piece about January this year about how smoking was cool again in Manhattan, but there's no accounting for different cultures. Yes, briefly, because we're way over.
Sorry, very, very quickly. I think smoking is still cool. I think the problem is that the reason that lots of people in the UK compared to places like Spain don't smoke is that the places where you smoke aren't cool. Like, you're in the back alley, you're in somewhere where there are bins and there's like maybe a rat going past and all of your friends are inside having a good time and you're out there in the cold, and like you smell bad because nobody else smokes, so they all smell lovely and you smell like cigarettes. So I think it's that actually a lot of it is, you know, smoking is hard. It's hard work, it's expensive, and it's pretty uncool to be a smoker. And I think that's actually, you know, smoking is cool.
Well, it's when they stop smoking in clubs, nightclubs smell awful.
Yeah.
And pubs too. Yeah, because they smell to piss. Can I come in on the glamorisation? Because I think that's a really important point. But but look, you know, many of those actors were paid to smoke. Humphrey Bogart was paid to smoke. I don't know about James Dean, but most of them were. And not only that, but at the time of the First World War, when smoking had really taken off, there were very few women smokers. It was associated with prostitution and, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know what the tobacco industry did? They paid women going on marches for the vote to carry banners saying, "Torches for freedom." And when smoking didn't go down as fast amongst women as it did amongst men, because in the 60s it was still associated with independence for women. And I don't know if anyone remembers, any of you are old enough, the Virginia Slims ad, "You've come a long way, baby." That tied it back into getting the vote. So the industry, and you're right, that legacy, and it's not dead, because actually there's so many programs that hark back to the past. Peaky Blinders, I don't know, Mad Men, you name it, that actually still glamorise smoking. So it is still there, being glamorised. And actually, although advertising is banned, you know, and sponsorship, thank God, is banned, because that was pervasive even once TV advertising was banned. All of that's gone, but the glamorisation of smoking and the representation of smoking on screen continues, and that's a real problem. That needs tackling.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And of course, Virginia Slims sponsored the women's LTA. Look, we've been going on quite a long time. Is the end of cigarettes nigh? I think we've got a pretty firm, in my mind at least, answer no. There's been real progress here. There's been real progress in Finland, and Arja's pretty confident there's going to be more. But as she said, there's no silver bullet. It's only a comprehensive approach that's getting where sort of David Brailsford law of marginal gains type thing. And in the meantime, huge profits and huge margins bigger than you, Sarah, are making with vaping, being made by the legacy tobacco companies, if not here, then in low and middle income parts of the world. Deborah, Sandy, Arja, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I've learned a bit, and let's have a drink rather than a cigarette.